It's worth pointing out that Diane Abbott has still got as her pinned tweet a message saying that she has been forced to reach the conclusion she will not get a fair hearing from the Labour leadership on the issue that really sort of underlies all of this. And that is still there. So I think it's safe to say there's still quite a lot of tension going on between her and the Labour leadership. And of course, this all goes back to a letter that she wrote more than a year ago to the Observer paper, in which she compared the experience of Jewish people and travellers with that of redheads. And that was under investigation for a long time. It then transpired that the Labour leadership had the results of the investigation for many months and had sat on them. And then this big question that kind of rumbled throughout last week about whether or not Diane Abbott would be allowed to stand as the Labour candidate for the seat that she has represented since 1987. It dominated the news agenda last week. You know, you kind of kept seeing Labour figures trying to get out there and send their messages out about all the different policies that they're trying to push out there. And every time they went for an interview, they were being asked about this. And it's safe to say it has been a bad week for Labour on that basis. But, you know, clearly then Keir Starmer said that she was free to stand. Then there was a question about whether she would or not. And I think probably that the suggestion that Diane Abbott would go quietly, I think probably comes from people that maybe don't really know her. And also the fact that she might have been bought off with a peerage. Again, she has ruled that out. So it's quite clear that she is going to run. And if she is re-elected, which I suspect she will be, given how popular she is in her constituency, she is going to be a very highly motivated enemy on the backbenchers.
It's interesting. I was speaking to Rachel Cunliffe from the New Statesman earlier, and she was saying, Kat, that she thinks that probably Labour had reached an agreement with Diane Abbott that she could have the whip restored, but that she would stand down and she'd be able to announce it in a way that kind of, at a time of her choosing. But this was kind of when we were expecting an election in the autumn, and that maybe the fact that now we've got an election in July kind of caught Labour on the hop, and hence this mess. Is that your reading of it?
Yeah. I mean, look, there is precedent for this, and indeed, you know, this is what the Conservatives have done with Matt Hancock. Currently they have restored the whip to him on the understanding that he doesn't stand, and therefore he is able to leave as a Conservative MP with his head held sort of up high. And that was the kind of hope with Diane Abbott, but clearly that deal was not concluded in time, and it has been quite a big mess. And it's really interesting because, of course, up until this kind of all blew up, you know, it was looking as though Labour had been the more organised of the two parties, had done the vast majority of its selections, and obviously last week we also saw at the same time as this a lot of sort of plum seats being given to Starmerite or Starmer adjacent types. Torsten Bell in Swansea West, Josh Simons, who heads up the Labour Together think tank, and of course Luke Akehurst. And this, I think, kind of that may well have been part of the plan always, to give these people the seats when the election campaign starts. It becomes a lot more difficult for the local constituencies to kind of have a say. Conservatives had a lot more seats to fill, and yet this Diane Abbott issue, I think, look, is it going to make a big difference at the end of the day? Probably not, but it certainly gives you a sense that perhaps the tightly controlled machine that we all thought Labour was operating at the minute isn't quite as controlled as we saw. And of course, their opponents.
John, has Keir Starmer treated Diane Abbott fairly?
There's a bit of a whiff of Joe Stalin about this, isn't there? I mean, so the Tories do purges to Boris Johnson when he was getting Brexit done, crashing the British economy, another way of putting it. About 19 Tory MPs were shot, including my good friend Nick Soames, who was always a brilliant trooper when it came to the Church of Scientology. And there's something kind of uneasy, or it makes me feel uneasy what they were doing to Diane Abbott. Listen, I don't agree with her politics, and I certainly don't agree with with what she said, and it was in relation to Israel-Palestine. It was foolish, but she has been a tremendous trailblazer. She was the first black woman MP. Very brave. She gets an enormous amount of hatred, which she deals with in a very noble way on social media and all that stuff. And for her to be not allowed to run as a Labour MP, while the Labour Party welcomes um, Elphick, who's really, really, really quite right wing, I thought, gosh, that's not fair or reasonable, and it feels like that Keir Starmer kind of got that. It also feels as though he was slightly in awe of Angela Rayner, his deputy, who is now she's got her rockets are really going because she's been cleared by the Manchester cops for the housing thing, which was always I thought a silly storm in a teacup. But it feels like it's always the way the Labour left. You think it's dead, and then it comes back at you, and we don't know how this is going to land up. Whether Diane Abbott's going to end up in the morgue that calls itself the House of Lords, or whether she's going to have another run as an MP. But I felt uncomfortable watching this, and the idea that you've got to purge people you politically disagree with inside a political party, I'm uncomfortable with it.
Michael, Labour candidate Michael Shanks, is John right? Does Keir Starmer have a whiff of Joe Stalin over this?
Well, no, and I don't think the characterization. Yeah, John's laughing, not surprisingly. I don't think the characterization of this as being the same as the Elphick thing is right at all. For starters, Natalie Elphick crossed the floor because she fundamentally disagreed with the Prime Minister's stance on immigration as the MP for Dover. And she was at no point going to be a candidate for the Labour Party, and she is not a candidate for the Labour Party. And at no point has this Diane Abbott situation been about any of Diane's views. I don't share a lot of Diane's politics, but we're a broad church and we agree on the fundamentals, which is delivering a Labour government, because we know that's what working people across this country need. But she was suspended, let's not forget, for making a comment that was actually really problematic. And that's what the investigation into her was about. This wasn't some kind of purge because of a political view she'd shared. She was suspended for a particular reason. And that's the process that we've been seeing the end of at this point. That's now concluded, and she's free to stand as a candidate. And I think it's entirely up to her now to decide whether, after 37 years, a remarkable career in so many ways, and John, I think, is absolutely right. The abuse Diane gets, and other black female MPs, in fact, but Diane in particular, is absolutely unbelievable. And you just need to spend 5 minutes on Twitter to see some of the disgusting comments that are sent her way. She's fought against a lot of that. She is a trailblazer, and it's up to her now to decide if she wants to stand again for Labour or retire. And I think everyone would, after 37 years, think it was entirely justifiable if she decided now was the time to bow out.